Baruchot habaot, ladies, and welcome to our weekly shiur, and a freilich and Chanukah, happy Chanukah to each and every single one of you, and especially for the ones who are tuning in, whether you're tuning in to Torah Anytime or to ohelsorah.com. We commend you on your perseverance and your devotion and commitment to Torah learning. And especially now in this week where women come out to study Torah on Chanukah, it is the most amazing zechut you could absorb and also collect for yourselves. As you know, we are now celebrating one of the most illuminating and miraculous holidays on the Jewish calendar. It's a chag that personifies us as a singular and unique nation. It's a chag that is filled with the light of a very special Kedusha, and it's mesugal for miracles. And because there's so much to discover about this chag, I wanted to learn together with you an amazing insight that I hope will strengthen you on many levels. And then, of course, we're going to make an announcement later how you can contribute this week Chanukah to our cause. And of course, at the same time, because the parashiyot that coincide with Chanukah are so powerful, I have to also find a way to connect the stories in the parashiyot to Chanukah, because in Yahadut there are no coincidences. That means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to read the story of Yosef HaTzadik, alav shalom, and the brothers, specifically during Chanukah every year, because somehow they are connected, they're linked. So let's begin. The pasuk in this week's parasha states, VeYosef ben sheva esre shana. Yosef was 17 years old when he was sold and went down to Egypt. The question is, why does the Torah HaKadoshah have to point out that he was 17? I mean, does it make a difference how old he was? And if he was 16 or 18, would it matter? Ladies, there are no words in the Torah that are written in a superfluous manner. Every word is instructive and contains a lesson behind it. So when the Torah tells me that Yosef was 17, it means that I have to know that age. But why? What is it coming to teach me? What does the Torah want to inform me by telling me that Yosef was 17 years old when he went down to Egypt? If you remember a few parashiyot ago, Yaakov Avinu alav shalom was instructed by his mother Rivka to leave the house to avoid the wrath of Esav. And she told him to travel to Haran to live with his uncle Lavan and remain there yamim achadim, for a certain amount of days. Yaakov obeyed his mother and he made his way to Haran when he was 63 years old. Now, interestingly, on the way to Haran, he took a detour and he checked himself into the yeshiva of Shem Va'ever, which was the main learning academy of its time, and he remained there for 14 years. So, if Yaakov was 63 when he went to the yeshiva of Shem Va'ever and he was there for 14 years, obviously, make the calculation, when Yaakov was 77 years old, he finally made his way to Lavan's house. And then he got married 7 years later when he was 84 years old. Imagine making a shidduch at that age. So, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, alav shalom, asks the following question. Why did Yaakov have to spend another 14 years studying in the yeshiva of Shem Va'ever? Yaakov Avinu was an ish tam, Yoshev Ohalim. He studied Torah his entire life. What was he missing in his learning that he felt a need to make such a long detour to learn all those additional years What did he learn in that yeshiva that he couldn't learn in his father's house, Yitzchak? And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky tells us something amazing. He says that for the first 63 years of his life, Yaakov Avinu learned the kind of Torah that taught him how to be a good and observant Jew in a Jewish environment. But now, for the first time in his life, he was leaving his holy home and he was going to an environment that was very toxic. He was going to be living in the godless environment of Lavan Ha'arami. For the first time in his life, he was going to be exposed to a life that's not remotely close to a life of Kedusha. He was going to be living in a non-Torah and non-ethical culture. If you're forced to live in such a place, you have to learn an entirely different Torah, a new Torah. So Yaakov Avinu now had to learn the kind of Torah that teaches him how to remain a tzaddik under the most adverse conditions. And who better to teach him this new curriculum than two men that not only preached it, but they practiced it. Because who was Shem? Shem was Noach's son. Shem survived the great flood, the Mabul, that destroyed all of mankind. He lived during Dor HaMabul, which was one of the worst and degenerate societies. So who better to teach Yaakov than Shem? Shem lived in the most immoral society that was filled with thievery and promiscuity. Yet Shem was able to maintain his humanity and his righteousness. The generation of the flood was so evil that Hashem had no other choice but to destroy it. Yet Shem managed to remain a tzaddik. And for that reason, he had life lessons from his own personal experience that he could share with Yaakov. Now, who was Ever? Ever was Noach's grandson. He lived during the Dor HaHaflaga. That was the generation where the people built a tall tower in order to wage war against the master of the universe. If you could think of such a thing, waging war against the Ribono Shel Olam. So this was one of the most defiant generations of all time. They were a generation of evil rebels. They were an anti-God society. So Ever grew up in this abominable society. And despite his environment, he became a tzaddik. He actually became the Rosh Yeshiva of this learning academy. So such a man can teach Yaakov Avinu how to remain holy in a degenerate environment if need be. Because who else was going to teach him? A regular Rosh Yeshiva cannot teach such a thing. And that's why Yaakov Avinu felt the need to learn in this specific yeshiva for 14 years. So the Torah HaKadosha is telling us that he needed those 14 years to secure his neshama before he set out in the direction of Lavan's house. Such a Torah, such fortification, you could only receive from a yeshiva like Shem Va'ever. It's an exclusive Torah that can only have been taught in that particular institution. The good news is that it worked. Yaakov Avinu lived in Lavan's house for 22 years. And when he left, the pasuk says, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem. When Yaakov left Haran, he was complete. He was complete in his Torah. He was complete in his emunah. And I ask you, who else of Yaakov Avinu's children would find themselves away from the house of Kedusha? Who else? Yosef HaTzadik, alav shalom. Many of the events that happened to Yaakov would eventually transpire with Yosef. The pasuk tells us, Ele Toledot Yaakov Yosef. The Torah is telling us that Yaakov's journey was very similar to that of Yosef's. Yosef's story was like deja vu. It's something that sounds very familiar to us. How so? Well, first of all, Yosef found himself in Egypt as a handsome 17-year-old boy with no semblance of Jewish life anywhere in his vicinity. He was the only one. He was the only Jew there. He didn't even have a minyan. Better yet, they didn't even have a zimun, for that matter. They didn't have a Hillel house. And I don't even think they had a Chabad over there in Egypt. But you never know. Maybe they had Chabad there. So how would Yosef maintain his tzidkut? Borei Olam, in his infinite wisdom, orchestrated a circumstance to secure Yosef's righteousness. How so? Well, Chachamim tell us that at the tender age of 3, when the child can begin to formulate words, the parents have to begin to teach the child Torah. And they begin to teach the Torah with words like Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kehilat Yaakov. And then you move on. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The Belzer Rebbe Alav Shalom said, probably then Yaakov Avinu taught Yosef Torah already from the age of 3. And if Yosef went down to Egypt when he was 17 years old, that means that Yaakov taught Yosef Torah for 14 years. That number is significant, as we learned earlier, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu designed it in such a way that Yaakov should instruct Yosef for 14 years. And which Torah was Yaakov going to give over to his son Yosef? The same Torah that he himself learned in Yeshivat Shem Va'ever. Because that's the Torah that Yosef would need in order to keep him insulated and protected when he finds himself in an anti-Torah society, in a land filled with Avodah Zarah, with Gilui Arayot. Those 14 years of Torah that Yaakov learned were transmitted to his son Yosef. So when the Torah tells us that Yosef was 17 years old, that age is very significant, because we're being told that since he began learning with Yaakov at the age of 3, it means that he learned a special kind of Torah for 14 years. And we know that the number 14 in this case represents the special learning that secures and fortifies one's neshama to combat the degenerate society and to help a person remain pure. And Rashi HaKadosh informs us of this when he comments on the pasuk that says, Ki ben zekunim hu lo. Yosef HaTzadik, Rashi tells us, was born to Yaakov in his old age. And then Rashi HaKadosh writes, Kol ma shelamad meshem va'ever, whatever Yaakov learned from Shem va'ever, masar lo. He transmitted it to Yosef. Question is, did it help Yosef? Well, let's see. The Torah tells us that Yosef was sold to Potiphar and he became his slave. Potiphar had a wife who is referred to in the Torah as Eshet Potiphar. The Torah doesn't even give her a name. And the Midrash informs us that she wanted to seduce Yosef into being intimate with her. She wanted to trap Yosef in her web of seduction and immorality. And this happened yom. Every single day she did something else to try to seduce him. As a matter of fact, the Midrash tells us that the clothes she wore in the morning, she did not wear in the afternoon. And the clothes she wore in the afternoon, she did not wear in the evening. She changed her clothing 3 times. Some women still have this minhag today. She did this yom, every single day, day in and day out. But Yosef didn't pay attention to her. Now I want you to listen closely to the pasuk that I'm going to read you now. And try to make a mental note of this. Listen to these words. Vayehi kehayom hazeh, and it was on that day. Vayavo habayta la'asot melachto. Yosef came to Potiphar's house to do his usual work. Ve'en ish me'anshe habayit sham babayit. And no one who's usually in the house was there on that day. The Gemara of Sotah wonders, what does it mean when it says la'asot melachto, that he went to do his work? And shockingly, the Gemara tells us that on that day that Yosef was on his way to Potiphar's house, he broke. In his mind, he had already decided that he's going to give in to Potiphar's wife and he's going to be intimate with her. He could not resist her any longer. He reached a point of no return. He was so worn down by the solicitations of Eshet Potiphar that he broke. Vayavo habayta la'asot melachto. When he walked into the house on that day, he was resolved to commit the sin. La'asot melachto. He was going to take care of business. The business of sinning with this woman. Now try and remember the following words, ladies. The Torah introduces the story, this particular story, with the words, Vayehi kehayom hazeh. And it was on that day. Potiphar approaches Yosef, Potiphar's wife. She grabs him by the collar, so to speak, and she says to him, Shichva imi. Lie with me. What does Yosef do? He leaves his overcoat in her hands. Vayanos hachutza. He ran out. He ran away. Yosef overcame this very difficult test. And Chachamim want to know, what happened here? What went on here? Because just moments before, just a few minutes before he ran away, he decided in his mind that he was going to commit this avera with this woman. What happened that he changed his mind and he did not succumb to the Yetzer Hara? You know what happened? Chachamim tell us that he suddenly saw the image of his father's face in the window. He saw demut diyukno shel aviv. And that's what caused him to run. But what does it mean that he saw the image of Yaakov Avinu? Our Rabbanim tell us that he saw the image of Yaakov as if that image was saying, my dear son, don't forget the 14 years of Torah that I taught you, because all those years were for this one moment here and now. I prepared you for 14 years for this moment. Do you really want to take all those years of learning and lose it all in one instant of desire? When Yosef saw Demut diyukno shel aviv, he was reminded of all those years of learning, of those 14 years that his father lovingly instructed him on matters of Kedusha and keeping oneself holy and separate, and that's why he ran. So just like learning this special kind of Torah saved Yaakov from Lavan, it worked for Yosef and it saved him from that moment. That's the pshat. But it's much more than that. It's deeper than that. You see, there are certain deeds or mitzvot that tzaddikim engage in, or even, for example, resistance to an avera that not only affects these tzaddikim, but also has implications for the future generations. That means that a mitzvah that's done in one generation has a consequence, has a reaction, or God forbid, a fallout many generations later. I'll give you an example. In Kiev, in the Ukraine, there's a certain area that's sealed off with no entry for miles and miles of open land, open area, open space. And nobody's allowed to go there. You know why it's like that? Because of what happened in Chernobyl almost 30 years ago, where a nuclear reactor melted down, and that entire area for miles on end became radioactive. So it was dangerous. Now this happened in Chernobyl many years ago, but this nuclear fallout, even decades after it happened, is still affecting the area and all the people who surround it. So there's a concept in Yahadut where there are certain mitzvot that tzaddikim engage in that are considered nuclear mitzvot. That means that many years later, there's still a benefit and a positive reaction from it. One time, the holy Chazon Ish, alav shalom, was walking on the streets of Bnei Brak on a Friday night, and he stopped all of a sudden at a certain spot, and he breathed in the air of that spot. And then he turned to one of his Talmidim and he says, do you feel what I feel? The student didn't know what the rabbi was talking about. And the Chazon Ish says, I could still feel and smell the scent of the Kedusha. The Talmid is like, oh, what Kedusha? What are you talking about? Said the Chazon Ish to the student, this afternoon there were two yeshiva boys discussing Torah right here in this spot. And I could still feel the after effects of their Torah. Wow. That means that whenever you do a mitzvah in a certain place, you leave behind in that very place a certain amount of holiness. So let me remind you that Bnei Israel were in Egypt for 210 years, and they fell to a very low level of spirituality, very low. But Chachamim tell us that there was one mitzvah that they were extremely careful about. What mitzvah was that? We're told that the Jewish people did not assimilate. There was no intermarriage or immoral behavior, except for one case in 210 years involving one flirtatious girl named Shlomit Bat Divri. And the Torah tells us her story to inform us that besides her, everybody else was pretty good. Ladies, the Jews kept to themselves. They did not get involved in the Egyptian society. You know why that's amazing? We're living in the United States of America for over 200 years. And we have the highest assimilation rate that ever existed. Statistics show that 8 out of every 10 marriages are interfaith marriages. That means Mr. Cohen married Miss O'Reilly. Miss Levy married Mr. Stevens. Assimilation is rampant in this country. As a matter of fact, there's a man in Florida who calls himself a rabbi, and he publicizes in the magazines that he's willing to officiate any interfaith marriage because that's his specialty. No? You understand what's going on here? If he's advertising it, that means there's a clientele. That's frightening. But, you know, in a way, it's almost expected after living in such a country for over 200 years. Many Jews, unfortunately, in the United States of America, they took on the traits of the host, which in our case is the United States. Many Jews, even Haredi Jews, sadly, have begun to speak like Americans, act like them, dress like them, think like them, go to places that they go to. And suddenly we became them. Many Jews melted into the melting pot of America, and we became homogenized into this society. Many Jews lost, and they're losing their identity. But in Egypt that didn't happen. And they were there for over 200 years. You know why it didn't happen? Because on that day that Yosef resisted the temptations of Eshet Potifar, he created a nuclear mitzvah that assisted and protected all the Jews from assimilating for the next 200 years. So if the Jews were able to remain isolated in Egypt, they can thank Yosef HaTzadik for setting the groundwork and laying the foundation. Now, if you think I'm exaggerating, listen to some psukim I'm going to read to you and remember some of the key words that I asked you to remember earlier. At the end of Parashat Vayechi, Yaakov Avinu died. And it's just the brothers and Yosef who are left. And the Shvatim are obviously very scared because they're thinking the following. They're saying, oh, now that our father died, maybe Yosef will finally take revenge on us. And the Pasuk tells us that Yosef understood what they were feeling. And he told them the following. He said, Al tirau, don't be afraid. Atem chashavtem alai ra'ah. I know that you had sinister plans against me. You had bad intentions. You sold me down to Egypt. But don't worry. Elokim chasheva letova. God made it work out because He had other plans which worked out very well for me. And why did it work out okay? Listen to what Yosef says. You know why Hashem decided to bring me down to Egypt? Lema'an aso, in order that I should be able to fulfill Kayom hazeh. Yosef was saying, you know why I had to be sold and came down to Egypt? Lema'an aso Kayom hazeh. It was in order to overcome that one nisayon of Eshet Potifar, to fulfill the act of resistance on that day of Vayehi Kehayom Hazeh. And you know why that day was so important? He says, Lahachayot Am Rav. In order to sustain a great nation, to sustain Bnei Israel spiritually, so that when they would eventually go down to Egypt, they would be protected and they too would resist. Yosef understood that the day that he resisted Eshet Potifar was part of his tikkun. He understood that he was laying the foundations of resistance not only for himself, but for all of Am Yisrael, so that they shouldn't assimilate in the galut of Mitzrayim. Now I want to point out something very interesting. When the Jewish people left Mitzrayim after all those years, the Pasuk in Sefer Shemot says, Vayar Yisrael et hayad hagedola. The Jewish people saw the mighty hand of God. But what does Vayar Yisrael really mean? Well, if you look at the Pasuk from a pshat level, Vayar Yisrael means the Jewish people saw. But if it was referring to the Jewish people, the Pasuk should have said, Vayiru Yisrael. This Pasuk should have been in the plural form. But Vayar Yisrael is in the singular form, as if one person is seeing things. So who is Yisrael? Who are we talking about over here? Chachamim tell us, Yaakov Avinu was also called Yisrael. That means that now we have Yaakov Avinu in the Shamayim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, my dear Yisrael, you saw your children going down to Egypt, but now you deserve to have a little nachat. Go back down to earth, because I want you to enjoy as you watch your children leaving Egypt. So Yaakov came down to earth. Vayar Yisrael. And he saw the Jewish people leaving Egypt, and he was amazed. Because you know what he saw? He saw Jews leaving Egypt. They were not assimilated. Their blood remained pure. They didn't intermingle with the Egyptians. So he said to himself, wow, this is incredible. 210 years in this God-forsaken place, in this place of Tumah, and there's no trace of assimilation? How could that be? How could that be? He says, wait. It must be that those 14 years of Torah that I taught Yosef protected him on that day, and those 14 years subsequently protected the Jewish people. Vayar Israel. You know what he saw? Et hayad hagedolah. What's this yad? Yad is in Gematria, Yud Daled is 14. Vayar Israel et hayad hagedolah. Yaakov saw the power of the yad. He saw that what those 14 years of Torah learning in Yeshivat Shem Va'ever did. He saw that those 14 years of learning that he passed on to Yosef HaTzadik protected his son, and by default it protected all of Am Yisrael. At that moment Yisrael saw the Yad HaGedolah. He saw the power and the effects of that kind of Torah learning. Now this is all amazing, but what does it have to do with Chanukah? The holy Baal Megaleh Amukot Alav Shalom reveals something fascinating. He wrote that the king who ruled during the times of the Yevanim was a man by the name of Antiochus. He was a wicked king. He was Melech Yavan. Says the Baal Megaleh Amukot, the numerical value of the name Antiochus is 156. And that's the same numerical value as the name Yosef. Oh, what? Antiochus equals Yosef? What does that mean? Says the Baal Megaleh Amukot. Even more than this, the words Melech Yavan also equals 156 in Gematria. And that too is the same numerical value as Yosef. What does all this mean? What does all this mean? So in order to understand this, we need to go back and understand what happened during the times of the Yevanim. The Greeks, they were definitely anti-Semites. There's no question about that. But they were a little different than the typical anti-Semites of history. So let's compare Galut Yavan, for example, to the Galut of Paras Umadai. Let's compare Antiochus to Haman. Haman couldn't stand Jews. He couldn't tolerate the existence of Jews in the world. Haman was like Hitler, Yamach Shemo. Hitler also couldn't tolerate Jews. He couldn't handle the fact that there was a Jewish man named Weinberg, even though Mr. Weinberg may have been wearing a cross, Chaz v'Shalom. It didn't matter to Hitler. Your name was Weinberg, and therefore you didn't have a right to live. And if your grandfather's name was Cohen, even though you weren't affiliated with Judaism and you attended the church every week, it didn't matter to Hitler. If you had Jewish blood going back 3 generations, you were going to be exterminated, annihilated, and taken off the face of this earth. Hitler and Haman wanted to get rid of the Jews because they couldn't stand the idea that Jews exist in the world. But the Greeks were different. They didn't have a problem with Jews. They just couldn't tolerate that a Jew should remain Jewish. The issue was the Jews' Jewishness. They didn't care that your name was Weinberg. As long as you don't act Jewish, you're welcome to remain in this world. The Greeks wanted to introduce the Jew to what they decided was the rich Greek culture. It was a culture that had its own haircuts. It was a culture that had its own dress code, not too much dress in the code. If you visit Greece, you'll see statues of the famous Greeks that are not suitable for any audience, because most of the statues are without clothing. And that's how the Greeks pranced around, by the way. They showed off their bodies, they showed off their muscles. They were very into the physical, the Gashmi. They were the ones who introduced sports and the Olympics. They actually invited the Jews to compete, to throw javelins and discuses. And slowly the Jewish people joined the Greek culture. The problem was that the Jews looked different than the Greeks because the men, they had a Brit Milah. You're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you, but Chachamim tell us that sadly, many men began to surgically reverse their Brit Milah so that they'd fit into the Greek society. These assimilated Jews were called Mityavnim. You know how many Jews became Mityavnim? According to the Ramban, alav shalom, 99% of the Jewish people took on the Greek culture and they shunned Judaism. You know what 99% is? He writes that if it wasn't for the 0.1%, for Matityahu, Cohen Gadol, and his children, game over. Nishtakach Torah miYisrael. The Torah would have been completely forgotten if it hadn't been for the Maccabim. There would have been no more Jews left. We were very close to being lost, to becoming completely assimilated. The Mityavnim, they were the large majority of the Jewish population. So do you know what the Baal Megaleh Amukot is telling us? Antiochus is the antithesis of Yosef. What Yosef accomplished for the Jews in Egypt on the side of Kedusha, Antiochus, with his sinister plot, was trying to destroy. There are, after all, powers of good and powers of evil in the world. They always have to balance each other. If there's good, there's bad. Therefore, Yosef was on one side of the scale. And who was Yosef's counterpart? His counterpart on the side of Tumah was Antiochus. So Yosef represents separation and isolation. He represents the imaginary wall between the Jewish people and the nations of the world. And Antiochus, as we sing in the Ma'oz Tzur, wanted to breach that wall. What do we say? Upartzu chomot migdalai. Not only did the Greeks want to breach the walls of the Bet HaMikdash, but they wanted to breach that imaginary wall that separates us from them. And once there was a small breach, a small opening in that wall, the Jews began to crawl through it by the droves, and they assimilated. Hence, Melech Yavan and Yosef, they are equal. Each of them has their own powers, which pulls them in opposite directions. This one to the side of Tumah, and the other to the side of Kedusha. And very interestingly, one of Antiochus's decree was what? He says to the Jewish people, Kitvu lachem al keren hashor, en lachem chelek me'elokei Yisrael. You should write for yourselves on the horn of an ox that you no longer have a share of the God of Israel. Why did Antiochus insist that they use the horn of an ox? Why could the Jews be commanded to write those words on a piece of parchment? Why dafka on the horn of an ox? Well, what kind of crazy decree is that? Why the horn of an ox? You know why? Because each of our Shevatim were compared to a specific animal. And Yosef was compared to an ox. V'chol shoro hadar lo. Yosef was compared to the ox. So Antiochus specifically decreed what he did because his intention was to uproot the ox. Meaning, whatever what Yosef was interested in accomplishing in Egypt, thousands of years later, Antiochus came along and he wanted to reverse everything. For this reason, the first thing the Greeks did when they entered the Bet HaMikdash was that they contaminated all the oils. Now, ladies, if you're the enemy and you're invading such a grand edifice like the Holy Temple, why would that be the first thing that you do, run to the oils? Wouldn't you confiscate all the treasures first? No. Instead, the Greeks were busy searching for the oils, and when they found them, they touched the canisters, broke the seals and the canisters of the oil, and that made them happy. How strange is that? They purposely made all the oils in the Bet HaMikdash impure, as if to demonstrate, this is our victory. Why did they care so much about the pachim of shemen? The answer is that for the Greeks, this was a symbolic gesture, because the Midrash teaches us that oil is different than any other liquid. All other liquids are able to somehow intermix with other liquids, but oil does not mix well with other liquids. Somehow oil manages to keep itself separate. So when the Greeks entered the Bet HaMikdash and they contaminated all the oils, the message that they were sending to the Jews was, all these centuries you may have kept yourselves distinct and separate just like this oil. But we just destroyed the oil. You're not going to remain separate and rise to the top. You're going to integrate yourselves into our society, and you're going to become one of us. Contaminating the oils was a message to the Jews that it's okay for them to assimilate. Sadly, to a large degree, the Yavanim succeeded, because the majority of the Jews became Niti Yavnim. They became enmeshed in the Greek culture, and they abandoned their faith, their traditions and beliefs. And that's why when we celebrate Chanukah, the primary ritual that we're involved in is lighting the menorah specifically with olive oil. Chanukah is the Chag that's meant to remind us that Am Yisrael is distinct and we must remain separate, because we are like the oil. We don't mix. That's why, by the way, some people have the minhag that when they prepare the menorah, they don't just use oil. They put a little water in the bottom of the glass cup. Why? So that when they pour the oil in, also the oil will rise to the top, and it will be very clear to the eye that there's a separation, that the oil didn't mix, that it remained separate. And that's the entire lesson of Chanukah. Do not lose your identity. You must maintain yourselves. Stay true to yourselves and remain among yourselves. So based on everything that we've learned here so far, the question is like this. Did the Rabbanim give us a clue anywhere in the tefillot of Chanukah that there is indeed a connection between Chanukah and Yosef HaTzadik? Ladies, we've been reciting this tefillah for so many years, and I don't know how many of us truly understand its intent. But in the tefillah of Bimei Matityahu, we recite the following words. We say, Ulecha asita Shem gadol vekadosh be'olamach. God, you have exalted your name and sanctified it in the world. Ule'amecha Yisrael asita teshu'ah. And for your nation of Israel, you created a tremendous salvation. Ufurkan, and the redemption, ke hayom hazeh. Oh, you redeemed us, Hashem, in the time of Chanukah, like what? Kehayom hazeh. Just like the story of Yosef and what happened to him on that day long ago. Our Chachamim put these words into our Chanukah prayer so that your eyes will see the words Kehayom hazeh, and it will remind us that we're like the oil and we're not meant to assimilate and integrate ourselves into the secular society. We're also reminded that working towards this goal requires an education of 14 years in which Yosef learned how to fortify himself if he should ever be placed in a circumstance where he's surrounded by tumah and foreign cultures. But guess what? When you read the tefillah of the Al Hanisim B'Yimei Matetyahu, you'll see that there's one word that repeats itself 5 times. What word is that? The word is yad. Listen to the wording. Reshaim beyad tzadikim, Tameim beyad tehorim, Giborim beyad chalashim, and so on and so forth. Yad, 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 yad. And that's an allusion to those 14 years of Torah that Yaakov Avinu studied in Yeshivat Shem Va'ever. That's the same Torah that Yaakov Avinu taught Yosef for 14 years. And now we know why these parshiot of Yosef always fall out on Chanukah, because they're linked. And I want to tell you something else. The Gemara of Sotah informs us that when Yosef saw his father's image, you know where it appeared? It says, Demut diyukno shel aviv nir'eta lo b'chalon. The Gemara tells us that he saw the image of his father in the window. Why was it in the window? Why didn't he see the image on the ceiling somewhere? Why not in his mind? You know why the window was so significant? Because there's one mitzvah that we engage in that involves a window. And that's the lighting of the Nerot Chanukah that we light at our windows. You should know that every time you walk down the street and you see a menorah in a window, that is Demut Diyukno Shel Yaakov Avinu. The image of Yaakov Avinu is peering through our windows as if he looks at his great-great-great-grandchildren in this galut, and he's telling us, don't succumb to the temptations of the secular world. Don't assimilate. Don't adapt the lifestyles of other nations. Remain separate and holy. Remain pure and distinct. We may not be able to see the actual image of Yaakov Avinu, but those flames that burn in our windows, that oil that rises to the top, is a reminder of what Yaakov taught Yosef, and it's a reminder of what Yosef managed to fortify for himself and for all future generations when he didn't succumb to the temptations of Eshet Potifar. On Chanukah, we light 36 candles in total, not including the shamash. And if you look at the word chalon, which means window, you'll notice that the 2 letters that rest in the center of the word chalon are lamed and vav. Lamed vav equals 36. And the first letter of the word chalon, which is a chet, and the last letter of the word chalon, which is a nun, stands for the words Nerot Chanukah. Oh. So the word chalon stands for Lamed Vav Nerot Chanukah. You know what this means? That the 36 flames that we light on Chanukah are supposed to remind us of what our position in life has to be as we proceed through this galut. It has to remind us to preserve our identities as Jews. But ironically, although Chanukah is such a holy Chag that's supposed to teach us all of these important lessons, it's become such a secularized Chag, and we've diminished its value with our interpretation of what the Chag should look like. Many of us are becoming mitiyavnim, lo alenu, without even realizing it. Think about it. Since when did Chanukah become a holiday where gifts are exchanged? That's not Chanukah, that's Christmas. And then we think of reasons why to give gifts. We're not supposed to hand out each other gifts. All these things that we do during this time period that has a slight resemblance to a foreign culture that doesn't belong to us, Chachamim tell us we have to do away with that. Because the modern day Yevanim know that if the Jewish people will celebrate Chanukah appropriately, then that may just prompt the final redemption, and the Jews may just be redeemed like they were in Egypt. So what does the Satan in the guise of the modern world do? He comes along to spoil the Shemen Zait Zach. He wants to do away with our pure oils. This is the challenge of the generation, ladies. So you know what the miracle of Chanukah is? Of course we know that the oil was meant to last for 1 day and it lasted for 8. But that's Bayamim Hahem. What about Bazman Hazeh? This shiur right here is the miracle of Chanukah. The fact that you all come to shiurim is the miracle of Chanukah. The fact that all you ladies tune in is a miracle of Chanukah, because after a 2,000-year exile, there are still Jewish women who gather together to hear words of Torah and to be inspired by our history and traditions. And Yaakov Avinu looks down from the heavens. Vayar Yisrael et hayad hagedolah. And he says, Yishtabach shemo la'ad. Look at the Jewish people. There's still hope. Ladies, it's a miracle that we're still Jewish. 99% of our Jewish brothers in Yavan became mityavnim. Yet we've lasted 2,000 years and we're still very Jewish. All of you can raise the flag of victory against the Greeks. But you should know that it's a battle that we have to fight every single day. We must constantly see demut diyukno shel Yaakov Avinu. And that can happen after you light the menorah. Don't run away after you light the Chanukah candles. Just stay there and gaze into them. Let those holy candles and the light that emanates from them wash over your souls. Absorb the light of the menorah, because it has magical powers that can protect us the entire year. These candles, hanerot halalu, kodesh hem, they're filled with holiness. Chanukah is the holiday where we're meant to commit ourselves to once again erect that wall of Kedusha that's supposed to separate us from the other nations of the world. Chanukah is the holiday where we have to work on shedding some of the foreign culture we've adapted and to commit ourselves to reverting to our Jewish roots. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We have to be proud to be Jews. That foreign culture that the Greeks produced on Mount Olympus, that tall and majestic mountain that stood over 10,000 feet high, what did it provide in the end? A culture that in its literature talks about multiple gods who descend into this world and commit adultery with married women. That's the literature of Greece. It's a culture that teaches how the Spartans used to bring their little children up to the mountains and they would freeze to death. And that was their way, trying to show that only the strongest who survived deserved to be in the Greek army. This is the culture that nurtured the philosopher Plato, who preached that at 6 years old, a child must hold a bow and an arrow, and that at 17, he must taste or smell blood. This is what Mount Olympus provided. And our small mountain called Har Sinai wasn't so majestic. But look what it produced. It produced ethics and values. It contributed to society. It didn't preach violence or adultery. Our Torah teaches laws like Lo Tirtzach veLo Tin'af. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Jewish people the Torah, we're told that all the mountains in the surrounding areas came in order to compete against little Har Sinai. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told those big mountains, Lama teratzedun harim gavnunim. You are like a giben. You are crippled. Why? The Greek culture, for example, is something we'd be dazzled by. It was amorous. Look at their art. Look at the sophistication and their philosophy, their mathematics. But in the end, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says it was nothing but a giben. It was a crippling culture. And where is that culture today? What contribution do we have today from the Greek culture besides feta cheese? But today the Greek culture can only be found in a library or a museum. Or you might need a shovel to excavate it from the archaeological digs. But the culture of Am Yisrael is Chai v'Kayam. Therefore, the holiday of Chanukah reminds us of how proud we have to be of our culture. Our culture isn't synthetic. It isn't man-made by corrupt and immoral human beings. Rather, our culture was created by God Almighty Himself. Remember these words, ladies. Hanerot halalu kodesh hem. Contemplate those words. Think about the words kehayom hazeh. You should consider the word yad, 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 yad when you come across it in your tefillot. You know, I once heard a rabbi saying the following: a Jew in exile must remember to make a kiddush. Kiddush means to separate oneself. Lekadesh means to sanctify by means of separation. He said, if the Jew in Galut won't make Kiddush, then the Goy will make a Havdalah. If you won't create that separation, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will send the nations of the world to distinguish you from them. Or worse, the Goy will come and devour you through assimilation. Ladies, it's good for us to hear this on Chanukah, because these are holy days, very holy days. Therefore, I want to first and foremost, say that this shiur is dedicated Leilui Nishmat, my grandmother, Sarah Bat Mimona Cohen, Alea Shalom, Shishram and Aliyat Neshama, and all the wonderful, wonderful deeds that she did, and all the mitzvot that she did, and the kindness in her heart, and her lev tov should give her an aliyat neshama as she looks down from heaven and sees all of our good work here, and the fact that Ohel Sarah is named after her, and everything that you take upon yourselves here and out there should be for her aliyah. And I'm sure she's looking down and she's so proud of each and every single one of us. I also want to dedicate this shiur for the refuah shelema of Yosef Dov ben Esther, and any person in Am Yisrael that truly needs Yeshuot and refuah. Also to the Chazara B'Tshuva of Avraham ben Malka. Should see tremendous Yeshuot. But it's good for us to hear what we just spoke about, ladies. And also, some of you wrote in wanting to know how you can help throughout the Chag. You can help by making your Chanukah donations to Ohel Sarah, by logging on to ohelsarah.com, www.ohelsarah, Sarah's without an H.com, and make your Chanukah donations. The Chanukah geld you could give to us. we have so much that we can do with it this Chanukah. As a matter of fact, Wednesday night we're having a gathering for women to try to bring them a little happiness in their life. Almanot, Gorshot, single women, divorced women. So it'd be nice if you can donate as a Chanukah gift to these women. But I want to leave you with this. Ladies, Bezat Hashem, if we consider these stories of Yosef and the brothers, Yosef in Egypt, and the nuclear mitzvah that he fulfilled, then our resistance to the Yetzer Hara will not only serve us well, it'll serve our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. Our modesty will bring Yeshuot and the Geulah. Because our religion is a religion of inches, is of daikanut. So our tzniut and moral code will not only serve us, it'll serve the future Benot Yisrael that are going to descend from us. That's the lesson of Chanukah. This is Dmut Diyukno. This is Yaakov Avinu's image. This is the Chalon. You ladies should know that you're on the right path. If you've committed yourself to these shiurim, if this is how you're spending your free time, then our nation is not bereft. There is hope. If this is how you're occupying yourselves, then you're giving Am Yisrael a future. As long as there are women like you who come out in droves or tune in to hear words of Torah, while the rest of the world is out gallivanting and involved in all kinds of trivialities and nonsense and all the hevel havalim, there's still a chance that we can remain separate, pure, and holy. You're giving the future generations a fighting chance to be the torch-bearers of real Kedusha. You are the Maccabim of this generation. When you tune in to listen to the shiurim, when you attend these classes, Yaakov Avinu's image becomes etched in your mind. My bracha to you, this Chag, is that you should be zeicha to remain separate like the olive oil, so that you could rise to the top. May you be blessed with the bracha that Yaakov Avinu offered his son Yosef, that he should be fruitful like the fish in the sea. The fish in the sea are protected from all the various curses that reside upon the earth. They're protected from the Ayin Hara. You know why? Because the fish are hidden. No one can see them from dry land. They remain separate in their own habitat. And we should be like the fish. Yehi Ratzon, that your inner core, your neshama, should be strengthened as you peer into the Neot of Chanukah. And may those candles infuse your being with light, with protection, and with a personal redemption. Amen Ken, Yehi Ratzon.
Ich bin mit meinem Stamm.